All right, hello everyone. I am Thomas, and welcome to my channel. Uh, I do educational videos on many different subjects. We are in the middle of doing stuff on the reciprocal system of theory of Dewey B. Larson, a theory that he developed back in the 20th century, starting around 1930, and he worked it out inductively up until the 50s and came out with his two initial fundamental postulates. And then from there, he deductively, took those postulates and said, if this, then that, if this, then that, and step by step derived the reciprocal system in fields such as physics and chemistry and astronomy, and also economics. And eventually, he came around to doing metaphysics, such as philosophy and religion and psychology. And that's what we're looking at right now is his final book, Beyond Space and Time, which is on metaphysics, and it came out posthumously in 1995. Now, his first fundamental postulate is that the physical universe is composed entirely of one component, motion, existing in 3 dimensions, in discrete units, and with 2 reciprocal aspects, space and time. The universe is not made out of matter. It's not made out of energy. It's made out of motion. Motion is the relationship between space and time. Space and time are the same, except that they are reciprocals of each other. In that they both have 3 dimensions, I would say 3 or 4 dimensions, and they both are in discrete units. There is a minimum unit of space, and there is a minimum unit of time. There's nothing less than this minimum unit of space or time. And 1 unit of space in 1 unit of time represents the speed of light. And the speed of light, unlike what Einstein says, where Einstein says that the speed of light is the maximum speed of the universe, Larson says that the speed of light is the midpoint or the neutral point of the universe, and half the universe moves slower than the speed of light. He calls that the material sector. And that's the sector we're familiar with the familiar measurements in chemistry and physics and astronomy, to a large extent astronomy. And then there's also what he calls the cosmic sector. This is the sector that's moving faster than the speed of light. Now, we don't really perceive the cosmic sector as easily, if at all, but since there is a reciprocal relationship between space and time, we can extrapolate what goes on in the cosmic sector by simply inverting time and space, or switching their roles. So in the material sector, everything is space over time. How many units of space and how many units of time. And recall that time and space both have potentially 3 dimensions. And then you reverse those roles and you get what's going on in the cosmic sector. You reverse the time and space. So for example, speed is space over time. It took me, I was driving 25 miles an hour. But if you want to invert that, you get time over space. And that is, it took me 25 minutes to move that thing 20 feet. And that is energy. So energy is the time over space. Turns out that all scientific phenomena are strictly relationships between space and time. So, for example, matter is time to the third power over space to the third power. Acceleration, as we know, is space over time to the second power. But its conjugate, which would be time over space to the second power, is what is known as force. And then, pressure, for example, is time over space to the fourth power, which breaks down to energy per volume. Time over space times 1 over space to the third power. So it's time over space to the fourth power. And we have many other relations that are like that can be expressed in terms of space and time. And it's a good proof for the system because you can always work out your equations. You can go to all of the historical equations that they've derived and see if the units work out. So for example, you can go E equals mc squared. Energy equals matter times the speed of light squared. Energy is time over space, and that equals matter, which is time to the third power over space to the third power, times the speed of light squared. That's speed squared is s to the second power over t to the second power. So it all works out. And you can check your equations that way. So Larson provides a built-in check, or the reciprocal system provides a built-in check. He used all of these different relations, and we derived these in those 15 videos that I did on his deductive development of the reciprocal system. So you can go back and look at those. But now we are looking at the beyond space and time, and he basically developed 4 more postulates, and metaphysical postulates. And then he plugged those in. The basic idea is that we have, the material sector and the cosmic sector. And when the material sector gets to its most complex level, atoms and molecules will get to its most complex, which is DNA. Then that DNA, it has become complicated enough so that it can accommodate a control unit from the cosmic sector. It becomes under the control of cosmic sector, and that is what he calls life. So the life unit is a combination of a material unit and a cosmic unit. And then to go further to the next level, when the life unit gets to its most complex, it becomes possible to come under the control of a sector 3 unit. Sector 3, he says, is independent of space and time, beyond space and time. I think he was looking for the word God, but he calls it sector 3. And so this sector 3 component can come, and it can also take control of this life unit. And that is what he calls the ethical human, or the ethical man. And so man is the most complex life unit, and then it comes under control of the beyond space and time, or the independent of space and time unit from sector 3. But it's not a complete takeover. It becomes a competition. So life is still relevant and still valid. So life is bent upon survival, whereas the metaphysical unit is bent upon ethics. So the human being is the arena for this kind of battle between survival and ethical behavior. And at certain points, those two things work in harmony, but in certain times they work opposite to each other, and the human being has to decide which they're going to go with, the purely survival motivation or the ethical motivation. Now, we are in this third of the three chapters in here, chapter 10, on revelation. Revelation is one of the communications that we get from Sector 3, from this beyond space and time place. And he, talks about ESP, he talks about, including telepathy, he talks about intuition, scientific insight, and revelation. It really says that they're all fundamentally, the same thing. They are communications from the Sector 3. And so we went through Revelation and some of the weaknesses and some of the strengths. And finally, we got to him talking about the book of Genesis and how the book of Genesis was a revelation, but that revelation has a tendency to be wrong. It can very easily be wrong, not because the communication is wrong, but because the human being's ability to translate the communication is fouled up by various biases, such as authoritarian bias, if the revelation gives you more authority, or just wishful thinking, or anthropomorphism, if you're wanting to continually attach human personality characteristics to Sector 3. And so, Sector 3 comes to you in a certain way, but you're continually wanting to give it a personality, then your revelation can be skewed. And as a result, revelation turns out to be not as reliable as scientific scientific procedure in manners that are having to do with the physical. But when you're dealing with matters that are more religious, that's when revelation can really help. So that's where we're starting here at the end of chapter 10. But in order to understand the true meaning of revelation, we must realize that primitive people who went about their daily tasks without the benefit of a vast store of factual knowledge that exists today found it necessary to attribute all unexplainable natural processes to direct action of supernatural beings. And in translating their statements into the modern idiom, we must take this fact into account. For instance, if we read an account of the death of a chief among the ancient Greeks in the legendary history of the race, we may find it stated that the unfortunate man incurred the wrath of the gods and was slain by one of Jove's arrows. But this is just primitive man's way of expressing the simple, but to him mysterious, fact of a death by lightning. And that is the way we interpret the account. We strip away all of the personification of forces and look only at the underlying facts. Now, to interject, I would mention that a lot of times when we do look at mythology, like Greek mythology, we're able to kind of strip away the personification of forces and recognize that one of Jove's arrows is actually lightning. However, when we read it in Genesis or in the Bible, we seem to have a lot more difficulty actually taking out that personification. And it's a lot easier for us to look at something supernatural in the Bible as being literally true. Where if we read it in Greek mythology or Norse mythology or, West African mythology or whatever, we would immediately dismiss it as myth and try to come up with a natural explanation. But somehow, when we read it in Genesis or when we read it in the Gospels, we tend to want to give it more of that magical, supernatural interpretation. Okay, so in order to arrive at the real meaning of the Genesis story, we must recognize that it, too, is expressed in symbolic language, and to put that meaning into our own terms, we must remove the symbolism and get down to the real significance of each statement that is made. When we do this, we find that the Genesis story is not an account of creation. It is an account of the formation of the solar system and the evolution of man. Furthermore, it is astonishingly similar to the most up-to-date scientific accounts of these phenomena. The close correlation between the two can be seen very clearly in the tabular comparison that follows. Okay, so now he puts in these three different columns. One is Genesis as written. The other is the same with the primitive symbolism removed. And then the third is the scientific version. Now, this is important. Genesis 1. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. I'm not sure which Bible he's looking at or whatever. But in the beginning, God created heaven and the earth. Now he goes over to the other versions, and he does say, neither conventional science nor the reciprocal system has developed any information as to whether or not there was a creation. Comparison with the scripture text therefore begins with verse 2. So that is the advantage that Genesis has over the reciprocal system, and the non personified version is that Genesis actually has a beginning, whereas the reciprocal system punts on Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. And so it doesn't really start, the reciprocal system doesn't take over until verse 2. And, at least Larson was willing to admit that he can't penetrate that first verse of Genesis. But then we go to the second verse. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. Okay, now he's interpreting that without the personification. In the beginning, the earth was formless and featureless, and darkness prevailed. The forces of nature were at work. And then the scientific version is, about 4 billion years ago, the present substance of the solar system was a vast cloud of cold and widely dispersed matter. Gravitation acted upon the particles of matter, pulling them together and heating them in the process. And that comes from Larson's astronomy. That's his basic astronomical process of the formation of stars and planets. Okay, and then we go to Genesis 1, verse 3. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. And in the non-personified version, and in time, light appeared. And then the scientific version is, continuation of this process caused the interior portions of the cloud to condense into a luminous body, the sun. Okay, and I don't know if he's skipping up to chapter 6 here, or verse 6. And God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. Verse 7, and God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And then the non-personified version is, and then the Earth separated from its surroundings. And the scientific version is, later, the Earth and the other planets were formed by coalescence of other portions of the original material. Okay, now we're talking about verse 9. And God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together unto one place, and let the dry land appear. And the non-personified version is, and then distinct land and water areas appeared on the earth. And the scientific version is, and then distinct land and water areas appeared on the earth. Okay, so we go to a few more verses, and I guess we'll cover those next time. And then once we get through Genesis, he just goes into a fairly short discussion about this Genesis story and how it is a valid revelation, but that we have to unpack it to kind of figure out what it's actually saying. And then that will be the end of the chapter, and he'll move into the next chapter, which is called Information. So stay tuned for that next time. And meanwhile, hope you have a great day. And, if you want to take a look at all this stuff, you can find Larson's books online. And this one is Beyond Space and Time. And we're in the middle of chapter 10. And you can also review my videos to kind of get yourself caught up. This is hard stuff, but it's worth it. Okay, have a great day.